The power of names, reclaiming African heritage in the Bible and history. Names are not just words, they hold power. In every culture, names carry stories, identity, and history. But what happens when those names are altered, erased, or replaced? Throughout history, powerful forces have changed the names of people and places, not just to erase cultural identities but to shape the very narrative of history. This documentary dives into the powerful impact that renaming has had on African heritage, specifically within the context of the Bible, and how the reclaiming of these names is a critical part of restoring dignity and identity. The importance of names in African culture. In African cultures, a name is more than just an identifier, it's an expression of one's place in the world, their heritage, and their purpose. Many African societies believe that a name holds spiritual significance and is often a reflection of one's ancestral ties or a vision for the future. It's no wonder that colonial forces sought to change or erase these names. It was an attempt to erase the history that went with them. Names are the most powerful expressions of cultural identity, says Dr. Amara M. Senga, an expert in African cultural history. When you change a name, you change the entire narrative of that person's existence, their connection to their ancestors, and their place in the universe. This understanding is crucial when we look at how African names were manipulated, especially during the period of European colonialism. The practice of renaming people, places, and even gods was not accidental, it was part of a larger strategy to assert dominance and control. Consider the profound impact of European colonization on African societies. Dr. John Iliffe, in his book Africans, The History of a Continent, notes, colonial powers deliberately sought to undermine indigenous systems, particularly those that were centered around the family and the spiritual importance of names. This was not just a matter of control, it was a strategy to erase the very foundation of African identity. The renaming tactics of Eurocentric nationalists and colonizers. Throughout history, renaming has been one of the most effective tactics used by imperialist and nationalist powers. For example, Alexander the Great, during his campaigns in the 4th century BCE, not only conquered lands but also imposed Greek culture upon them, renaming cities after himself and his generals, as well as forcing local populations to adopt Greek names and customs. In essence, renaming was a way for Alexander to plant Greek civilization in foreign soil, explains Dr. Katherine D. Simmons, a historian of ancient civilizations. It was not just about conquering land, it was about controlling culture, erasing the identity of those who had lived there for centuries. But this practice didn't stop with the ancient Greeks. The same tactics were employed during European colonization, particularly in Africa. Enslaved Africans were often given European names, stripping them of their African identities. Over time, this erasure of names became part of the ongoing narrative of African dispossession and displacement. In 1492, the Spanish crown ordered the expulsion of Jews from Spain, forcing many to change their names in order to convert to Christianity and avoid persecution. These forced name changes reflect a long-standing European strategy of renaming to strip people of their heritage. Names were central to European colonial efforts, writes Dr. Gerald Horne in The White Pacific. By renaming conquered peoples, they sought not only to control them but to erase their connection to their past. The renaming of biblical figures. The Bible, the sacred text for billions, is filled with figures whose names have been altered or obscured over time. While many of these changes were made unintentionally, others were part of a deliberate strategy to align biblical narratives with European ideals, erasing the African and Semitic roots of many biblical characters. The Maccabees, warriors who fought for Jewish freedom during the 2nd century BCE, are a prime example of this. While their story is widely celebrated, the names of these figures were often adjusted to reflect Greco-Roman influences. Their African roots were deliberately minimized in favor of a more Eurocentric narrative. Dr. Ruth B. Ben-Ghiat, a scholar of ancient Jewish history, explains, by the time the Maccabees' story reached the West, their names had been adapted to align with Greek and Roman traditions. This was not just a translation, it was a cultural shift that sought to distance the Maccabees from their African heritage. In the early Christian Church, the Latin translations of the Bible, particularly those by Saint Jerome in the 4th century CE, furthered the process of renaming. By using Latinized forms of names, such as Judas Maccabeus instead of the original Hebrew or Aramaic, the cultural connection to Africa and the Middle East was diminished. As Dr. William H. Jones notes in the Bible and its hidden African legacy, many of the names in the Bible were altered, and through these changes, the African connections were obscured, aligning the figures more closely with the Roman and later European Church. Reclaiming African names and heritage. Reclaiming these names is not just about historical accuracy, it's an act of resistance. By restoring African names to biblical figures, we're not only honoring their legacy but also challenging the long-standing colonial narratives that sought to erase them. Dr. Nia T. Jones, an expert in African diasporic studies, states, "The act of reclaiming names is a revolutionary act. It's a way for descendants of Africa to reassert their cultural identity in a world that has long sought to suppress it. By calling the Maccabees by their original names, we are not only remembering their story, we are rewriting it." Reclaiming these names also allows us to connect to the spiritual power embedded in those names. In African cultures, names are seen as a divine gift, and to restore the original names of biblical figures is to reconnect with the divine source that first gave them. In 1965, Malcolm X, during his pilgrimage to Mecca, adopted the name El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, shedding the slave name, Little, and reclaiming his African identity. "I am Malcolm X, but I am also someone greater," he said. "This is a return to who I am. My name is a reflection of my ancestors' strength, their struggle, and their resilience." Connecting the past to the present. The fight to reclaim African names is not just about history, it is a vital part of the global struggle for African dignity and self-determination. From the African diaspora to the African continent, there is a growing movement to restore African names and heritage. By reconnecting with our roots, we can reclaim the power that was once stripped away. Dr. Akua F. Nyamaki, a cultural historian, explains, reclaiming names is about understanding that we are not just individuals, we are part of a larger cultural and historical continuum. Our names connect us to our ancestors, and in restoring them, we restore the very essence of who we are. The legacy of renaming. The legacy of renaming continues to shape the world today. We see it in the ongoing fight for the rights of indigenous people, in the reclamation of African culture, and in the global movement to decolonize history. The renaming of people and places has had a profound impact on how we see the world, and the reclaiming of names is a crucial part of the resistance to colonialism. Names are powerful. They carry the weight of history, the strength of our ancestors, and the promise of our futures. In reclaiming African names, we are not just restoring history, we are shaping a future where African identity is recognized and celebrated. As we explore the stories of the Maccabees and other African historical figures, we invite you to join us in this journey of rediscovery. Let's make sure that the names of our ancestors are never forgotten. If this story resonated with you, join us this Sunday at 12:30 p.m. on YouTube for the premiere of the Apocrypha Chronicles, Rise of the Maccabees, as we continue this journey of reclaiming history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and comment below to let us know how you are reclaiming your own heritage.